Good evening. Welcome to the sixth and last of our candidate forums this year. My name is Laura Weiss. I am co-chair along with Neil McReynolds of the Horizon House Election Forums Committee. Before the August primary election, we held 3 forums to help voters reduce the long list of candidates to 2 people per race. Now, before the general election on November 2nd, we have been bringing you candidates in important local elections. Seattle Port Commission on September 27th, and Seattle Mayor and School Board District number 4 on October 5th. This evening, we will hear from candidates for Seattle City Council position 9 and for Seattle City Attorney. Co-sponsors of this series of election forums are our Residents Council at Horizon House and the First Hill unit of the Seattle King County League of Women Voters. The League is providing links to our forums, making them available for League members and also the general public through YouTube. Before turning the program over to our moderator, let me say a few words about Seattle City Council position 9 and what the job entails. Position 9 is one of only 2 council positions elected citywide. The other 7 members are elected by district. For example, Horizon House is located in District 7, represented by Andrew Lewis, who was elected 2 years ago. Each city council member serves a 4-year term. What is the role and what are the responsibilities of a city council member? The Seattle City Charter describes the role of the council as legislative body for the city. It develops laws and policies intended to promote the health and safety of Seattle's residents. It has the sole responsibility of approving the city's budget, which this year is $6.5 billion, including operating and capital budgets. Among some of the specific functions of the City Council are establishing long and short-term objectives and priorities, overseeing performance of city employees and the effectiveness of city programs, regulating land use through zoning laws, and regulating public health and safety. With that as background, let me introduce the moderator for this evening's program and my co-chair on the Forums Committee, Neil McReynolds.
Well, thank you, Laura, and welcome everyone. This evening in our final election forum, we feature the 2 candidates for Seattle City Council, position 9, Sara Nelson and Nikkita Oliver. As a reminder, later in the evening, we'll hear from the 2 candidates for Seattle City Attorney. So be sure to stick with us for this contest for another important city office. In the city council race, this will be the format. Each of you will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. Then you will have the opportunity to respond to questions submitted by Horizon House residents. You'll have 1 minute to answer each question. Then you'll have 2 minutes for a closing statement. We appreciate your honoring the signals of our timer. This will ensure we are fair to both of you and that we'll cover as many topics as possible with our questions. An on-screen warning sign will alert you when you have 15 seconds remaining. Then you'll get a final sign, finish please. I will pose the questions to each candidate, alternating which one answers first. Now for your opening statements. For this item only, we have sent you a question in advance, so please include in your response to this question. What unique quality or skill do you possess that make you the best candidate for this position on the City Council? We'll begin with Sara Nelson.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for your attention to this important election. I've lived in Seattle for 31 years, and I'm running because I believe that Seattle is going in the wrong direction and needs pragmatic, progressive leadership to get back on track. What's unique about me is that I have personal experience with the complexity and the nuance of policymaking from serving as legislative aide to Councilmember Richard Conlon for close to 10 years. And that was back when council was a functioning body. I know that responsible government requires getting and incorporating public input, taking time to get legislation right, and being accountable for how public resources are spent. I won't rule by soundbite, and I won't be bullied into listening to just the loudest voices. I will listen to all voices, and I'll focus on solving problems of real people living real lives. My husband and I have launched Fremont Brewing in 2009. So that would be unique. There has not been a small business owner on city council since 2009. Fremont Brewing offers our employees paid family leave, retirement plans, and health care. And we were hit hard by COVID, but we managed not to lay anybody off because of COVID and increase wages to make up for lost tips. So it's time for the pragmatic perspective of a small business owner on city council who knows what small businesses need to retain jobs and thrive. And also what needs to happen to downtown, because Seattle City Council is not doing anything with any urgency to help. Most of all, I'll care, and I'll do more than just pay lip service to helping small businesses. I'll get it done. So finally, one final quality I have is humility. I have a sense of what I don't know. So I've spent a lot of time on the campaign trail talking to people about what isn't working at city council and what they need. How can I help? That's how I've been leading on the campaign trail, and that's what I'll do on city council.
Okay, thank you. And now to Nikkita Oliver. Nikkita?
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Nikkita Oliver. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm always excited to share space with residents at Horizon House, as Floyd Jones and Eileen Morris were two of my very first donors in 2017 for our mayoral campaign. So you all hold a very dear spot in my heart. I am an attorney, an executive director, an adjunct professor at Seattle University School of Law, a community organizer, and an accomplished poet. I am a full-time working candidate and a renter living in Rainier Beach community, and have lived in Seattle for 17 years, working as a frontline service provider in numerous capacities. What makes me the most qualified candidate is that I have been working on the front lines of the crises that we are facing, helping young people and families navigate housing and finding places to live, navigating cash assistance, trying to figure out how to get access to healthy food and clean water in the midst of a pandemic. And I've experienced firsthand the failed policies of the current Seattle City Council that has not reached the needs, the deep solutions to address the housing affordability crisis, the need for equitable transportation, the racial wealth gap, and truly building out a Green New Deal, because we have to stop the climate catastrophe. Our city is facing compounding crises, and we can no longer delay on the solutions that will truly uproot the causes that are driving them. Yes, I am a community organizer, and I have been an activist for many years, in addition to being a lawyer that has served mostly pro bono and an executive director. And I think that that gives me a deep understanding of what it means to mobilize community, to work towards its best interest, to build coalitions that can develop policy that actually changes the material conditions of our most vulnerable residents. And I'm honored to be endorsed by Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, King County Councilmember Girmay Zahalai, and Seattle City Council members Teresa Mosqueda and Tammy Morales, because I can truly build a coalition to address the crises that we're facing.
Well, thank you. Okay, now the time for the questions submitted by Horizon House residents. A short version of each question will appear on your screen. You have 1 minute to respond. Horizon House and its residents have a stake in the safety and viability of downtown Seattle. What specific measures for the revitalization of downtown are most important? Nikkita?
So when we talk about downtown, I think it's very important to think about both livability and the workforce in our downtown corridor. There are many workers who work for tech that may not return back downtown, but there are workers who are part of our various storefronts that work in cleaning crews, that are a part of building a thriving theater and destination district. And so ensuring that those folks and the folks living in downtown Seattle have access to adequate resources, clean and hygienic spaces, and are supported through our public health approach to the housing affordability and homelessness crisis is going to be key. That's part of why I'm really pushing that we leverage our Jumpstart tax to build housing, and specifically think about building workforce and 0 to 30% AMI housing in the downtown corridor, and leverage a progressive revenue generating option to build out our behavioral health supports for the city of Seattle, so that folks who are needing access to both mental health and addiction supports can get those without having to go through the King County system.
Thank you. Sara?
So I received the top rating from Downtown Seattle Association because I do have a long list of policy proposals to help downtown, from land use, allowing ground floor street level residential on some streets that will add life to the streets, and also support small businesses down there, to improve permitting, to business recruitment, because businesses aren't just going to come here by themselves. And when I run these ideas by business owners and some of the arts directors downtown, what I hear over and over again is, that's nice, but public safety is our main concern. Businesses are leaving town because they are dealing with theft and damage, and their employees don't feel safe. They're leaving town because we still do not have a plan for homelessness, and encampments are creating a situation downtown that is not healthy for the people living in them, and also for people who live, work, and visit downtown. So those are my three things that are most important for revitalizing downtown.
Thank you, Sara. Many Seattle residents consider the city council, as currently constituted, to be dysfunctional, unable to work together to adequately deal with citywide issues. How can the council become more functional and better be able to govern effectively? Sara?
Well, there needs to be change on city council. This city council is not connected with its constituents. And as I said before, they seem to only listen to the loudest voices. And I'm running to return to city council the responsibility of really meeting the needs of constituents first. And so what I believe is that the ideological rhetoric and the failed policies are not helping. They're especially not helping our most vulnerable. And so what we need on city council is someone who will broaden the conversation, who will ask hard questions in council meetings, and who will put forward solutions that are actually implementable and will help people in their daily lives. So that the political nature of city council has to change for it to be a more functional body.
Thank you. Nikkita?
I firmly believe that the way a candidate campaigns is going to be emblematic of the way that they govern. For this reason, our campaign has been committed to having an extensive field strategy, knocking on doors, meeting with residents. We posted community listening posts so that we could build policy from the ground up with our most impacted communities. And we have been running mutual aid events, such as providing vaccination clinics and access to supports for community members who may not otherwise have it. I bring this up when talking about the council being functional, because whether or not you're connected to community starts in the way that you campaign. And a functional city council represents the interest of those who elected them, and more importantly, represents the interest of our most marginalized and vulnerable residents. How we address the housing affordability crisis, how we respond to homelessness, how we address the climate catastrophe is all going to be dependent upon not only having an effective strategy of council members being aligned, but having a true and nuanced understanding of what the solutions are that need to be put in place that will change those conditions.
Thank you. What is your plan to reduce homelessness, and how will you pay for it? Nikkita?
So I think it's really important to acknowledge that the King County Regional Homelessness Authority is now coming online, and as of January 1, will subsume most of Seattle's current housing and homelessness service provider contracts. The King County Regional Homelessness Authority is going to really be directing our response to the immediate needs of folks who are currently living outside. And as a city council member, I will be committed to working in collaboration with them. I've already met with them twice to begin talking about what effective collaboration looks like. And I've heard from Mark Jones that having somewhere between $120 to $140 million of Seattle contributing to the Regional Homelessness Authority is going to be essential. That being said, the Seattle City Council will have a responsibility of dealing with our upstream solutions. That means building green, social, affordable housing, acquiring buildings for folks to live in, and preserving our current supply of affordable units. And I think leveraging the Jumpstart tax, as well as putting in other progressive revenue generating options that our task force has identified, will help us have that $400 million per year for the next 10 years that we need to get out of this crisis.
Thank you. Sara?
Well, we need to stop doing what we're doing now because it's not working. Millions and millions and millions of dollars, and what have we gotten for it? The problem's only gotten worse. So everyone knows that the Regional Homelessness Authority is going to take leadership of a regional, response. That's great. But why has it taken so long? Why has it taken so long to realize that we need coordination amongst service providers? We need a real-time list of housing options so that when we do outreach to people living in encampments, they have somewhere to go right then. And we need, the most important thing in my mind, is substance abuse and mental illness treatment. And that is a big gaping hole in our response, and Seattle needs to fund that directly. And so what I will say is that regardless of which jurisdiction is taking the lead, this council has failed to address encampments. They have allowed a situation to become worse, not better. And it really is time to step aside and do something different, following best practices.
Thank you. Do you support current efforts to defund the police? Explain your answer. Sara?
No, talk about sound bites. I do not support defunding the police. That was a, council just picked a number out of thin air and said, we're going to defund the police. I do believe that we need to reform the police, and it should be done in a way that both holds officers accountable for misconduct and keeps people safe. And then we figure out how much it will cost and then do that. Not backwards. I am extremely concerned about the very slow response times. Everyone will say, well, that's because they are responding to calls that are social service calls, people in crisis. But the fact is, we've got an epidemic of gun violence. 81 mothers will not have their kids at the Thanksgiving table this year because they died. And so the last thing we should be doing is defunding the police even more. We need to make sure that they are adequately staffed, strengthen the community policing model by bringing back the community policing teams, which council cut, and then think about recruiting officers from communities to build trust and from communities. Yeah. Okay.
Nikkita.
Yes, I do support divesting from an ineffective system of public safety, and I refuse to fearmonger, so I'm going to use statistics. And the 2021, the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform, which specializes in reducing incarceration and gun violence, released an analysis of 3 years of 911 dispatch data from the Seattle Police Department. According to the Institute, up to half of the calls that SPD receives can be responded to without an armed, sworn officer. The Institute also found that 80% of the calls are non-criminal responses, and in the future, it would be appropriate for up to 49%, that's almost 50%, of calls to receive an alternative non-sworn response. I think it is essential that the city of Seattle build out a system of public health and public safety that responds to the crises that people are in when they call for help, rather than sending an officer that may escalate or exacerbate the condition that someone is in when they're in crisis. Providing the right response when a person is in an emergency is going to lead to better long-term solutions, better health for that individual, and better safety for everyone in our community.
Thank you. Is the city responsible for providing affordable housing? If so, how should it be paid for? Explain your answer. Nikkita?
Yes, I do believe the city is responsible for intervening in the current housing affordability crisis that we have. We've been in a state of emergency since 2015. And with the Housing Affordability and Livability Act and the mandatory housing affordability that requires certain amount of housing, affordable housing be built in new projects or payment into a fund, we are not seeing the private market being able to effectively respond to the crisis. So yes, the city needs to build affordable housing, and having public housing is not a new thing. We are actually a city that pioneered having integrated public housing at Yesler Terrace, one of the first cities to do it, and it was such a significant and important thing. We know that having social housing works. We know that it can help us lower the cost in the market, and we know that it can help us ensure that people both at the 0 to 30% AMI and 30 to 60% have access to housing, leveraging the Jumpstart tax and the progressive revenue options already identified by our task force will help us do this work of building housing for everyone in our city.
Sarah?
We're not going to be able to subsidize our way out of our housing affordability crisis. Face it, we're not. What we need to do first is retain the existing naturally affordable housing that is supplied by small housing providers and make it easier for them to stay in business, because when they sell their properties, it's redeveloped for market rate. We need to make the construction of new housing, private or public, easier by fixing our permitting system and by aligning our policy goals, more housing, with our regulatory environment, so that we're eliminating barriers in the building code, in the land use code, so that we can bring units online faster and less expensively. So there are a lot of things that we can do to help, but again, it's going to take the private market and in support of public affordable housing providers to get this done.
Thank you. Homicides have increased and the police budget, the size of the police force have decreased. What actions, if any, would you take to increase public safety throughout Seattle? Sarah?
Could you please repeat that first part?
Homicides have increased and the police budget and the size of the police force have decreased. What actions, if any, would you take to increase public safety throughout Seattle?
It is the responsibility of the city to provide adequate police protection in every district of the city. That's according to our charter, Article 6, Section 1. That is not happening. We have been dealing with historic attrition because, for many reasons, but council's call to defund the police is what drove our first Black female police chief out and led to a lot of people concerned about their job security. And so we need to build our staffing levels back up. The mayor's plan calls for a net 35 officers. I support that, and we need to make sure that every district is staffed, because when there are currently high response calls, those police officers in the north end go down to the south end, et cetera. So absolutely right. I am concerned about our understaffing of the police. I'll stop.
Thank you. Nikkita?
So I'm a lawyer and I am very concerned about being factual about what we're talking about. City Council responded to calls from community to do work to divest from a failed system of public safety and invest in community-based alternatives. What this ended up in was an 11% cut to Seattle Police Department, which was primarily moving parking enforcement to Seattle Department of Transportation and taking 911 out of the Seattle Police Department and moving them to the new Community Safety and Communications Department so we can civilianize them and grow the number of responses we have when people call in crisis. I think it's also important to acknowledge that in 2021, the budget was actually fully funded for the hiring plan that the mayor put forward for the number of folks that she said she needed to hire. So Seattle Police Department has actually not been defunded. What we have is a staffing crisis because 200 officers refused to get vaccinated as a part of their public health duties. So really what we need to ask ourselves, is the system affected? Are these officers actually committed to public health and public safety? And what would really generate safety for our most marginalized and vulnerable communities around meeting basic needs and providing real responses when people are in crisis?
Thank you. Replacing cars and trucks powered by fossil fuels with electric ones is one important way to decrease global warming. Should the city install charging stations citywide to facilitate using electrical vehicles? Explain your answer. Nikkita?
Yes, and I also think this would be an incredible opportunity for workforce development, working with both IBEW 46 and IBEW 77 to be able to grow our green economy workforce, to be able to build both the charging stations and expand our electrical grid of the city, to be able to respond to the much higher demand for electrification that we'll continue to have as we work our way out of the climate catastrophe. We know that our largest emissions, our carbon emissions footprint comes from single occupancy vehicles. So it's not just installing places where people can charge their electric vehicles, it's also going to be building out our transportation system with electrified vehicles that allows folks to access high capacity, rapid transit anywhere in the city. So we can also get folks out of their gas automobiles and into public transportation, which will also decrease traffic. And the other part of this is building density in places around these transportation hubs that have both workforce housing and 0 to 30% AMI, so people can walk to the store, walk to amenities, and walk to communities to decrease our carbon footprint.
Thanks. Sara?
I want to add a little bit on that previous question because Nikkita said community led to the changes in the police department. In fact, I've been talking to people in community, and what I've been hearing from some people, because it's not a monolithic block, is that they want more policing. They want better policing, not no policing. And so we have to be careful about who we're talking about when we talk about community, because I'm talking to police reform advocates, Reverend Harriet Walden and Victoria Beach, and they certainly are not in agreement with what the council did. Regarding electric vehicles, I do believe that we need to incentivize the installation of charging stations around the city, but then that's for single occupant vehicles. We're not going to be able to buy enough. So I am a big proponent of electrifying our buses, but that's metro. And so what we really need to do is make sure that we are focusing on our infrastructure so that our buses and other vehicles can operate more quickly, and that mobility of people and goods is okay.
Thank you. Should Seattle eliminate residential zoning restrictions in single-family neighborhoods, allowing for construction of multi-family housing? Explain your answer. That's
I guess I go first.
Sara. I'm sorry, Sara. Yes, Sara, thank you.
Yeah, Seattle essentially ended single-family zoning when it passed the laws allowing for ADUs, both accessory units and detached accessory units. And so essentially we already allow 3 units per lot. And I think that residential infill is good. It allows for people to age in place and also make an income off their property. And I think that we need to make that easier. However, I am concerned about multifamily everywhere, because what I'm hearing from people in the Central District and other neighborhoods that are under the pressure of gentrification and displacement is that they are being driven out. They want more opportunities for home ownership, and they want to be able to afford to stay in their neighborhoods.
Thank you. Nikkita?
So I love that Sara brought up the Central District, because the Central District, Rainier Beach, Ballard, University District, South Park, Georgetown are all areas that have experienced significant upzones because the rest of the city has refused to share the density needed, not just to address the housing affordability and homelessness crisis, but the density needed to address the climate catastrophe and build a truly interconnected, rapid transportation system that everyone can use. It is because of the way that we have structured density in this city that the Central District is experiencing these upzones and rapid displacement and gentrification. If we want to see neighborhoods like the Central District be places where our elders can retain home ownership, it's going to mean that the rest of single family zoned areas will have to take on more multifamily developments, like large apartment buildings that can have 3 or 4 bedrooms for workforce housing for families, in order to put in gentrification and anti-displacement policies that keep our elders in their homes. First Hill has also experienced this. And so it's going to be essential that density is equitably shared throughout the entirety of the city, excluding our industrial zones.
Thank you. Should Seattle end criminal prosecution for misdemeanors, including shoplifting, property destruction, prostitution, domestic violence, and misdemeanor assault? Explain your answer. Nikkita?
So I think it is significant to acknowledge that 80% or so of the folks that go through our misdemeanor criminal punishment system are folks that are found indigent. That means that they are poor, and we are often criminalizing poverty. I do think that prosecuting misdemeanors only further exacerbates the problem by pushing people deeper into the criminal punishment system. And we should stop prosecuting those misdemeanors and instead spend more resources on the front end, meeting basic needs, getting rid of the reasons for which people become quote unquote prolific offenders, make sure that people have access to adequate food, mental health care, physical health care, housing, transitional housing, jobs and economic opportunities so that they do not commit crimes of poverty in order to survive. And a mark of a thriving world-class city is one that does the work to prevent crime from happening by meeting basic needs. And I believe that is the city that Seattle can be.
Sara?
No, I opposed Herbold's affirmative defense legislation, and so did a lot of the business associations and residents around Seattle. Let's be real. When we talk about misdemeanors, there's a long list of crimes under misdemeanor. And when this is talked about, we're not talking about somebody stealing a sandwich in a 7-Eleven or something like that. We're talking about crimes that have serious impacts on people, whether it's a broken window over and over and over again, or exposure to a child, etc. I'm all for diversion programs for low-level crimes, because we do need to help people. But I'll just back up. But too often, people who are starting to commit misdemeanors end up committing bigger crimes or repeat crimes, and we need to treat crime seriously. It's having a huge impact on our safety and
Thank you. What steps do you support to enable the Seattle Police Department to come into full compliance with a court-ordered consent decree? Sara?
Well, we need to follow the judge here. Robart has slapped council on the wrist many times for attempts to overstep, and so basically, as I think I said earlier, we have got to tie the renewal of the SPOG contract with finally complying with the consent decree, and there are many other measures that we can take. Like following the 2017 police accountability ordinance. But, we've been under this for a long, long time, and council needs to listen to the judge and make sure that we are trying to come into compliance instead of keeping to push, instead of further out of compliance.
Thank you. And Nikkita?
Yeah, so I think it's actually foolish to say that it's the council that's keeping Seattle Police Department from being in compliance. It is Seattle Police Department and their leadership that is failing to get Seattle Police Department in compliance with not just the consent decree, but is also actively pushing back against the 2017 legislation that should have been put in place, that was unanimously voted on by the Seattle City Council. And then in the later collective bargaining agreement with Seattle Police Officers Guild basically thwarted those efforts. And so it is really about having a chief that, in my mind, is willing to acknowledge, one, there's racial disparity that has always existed within Seattle Police Department, that is willing to acknowledge that there are many, many things that police are not adequate to respond to, and is willing to do the work to not just get us in compliance, but get us towards a public safety system that actually responds to the real crisis that people are in. That might mean, or in my opinion does mean, less officers and more community-based responses to harm and crime.
Thank you. Some individuals in marginalized communities, the Black, indigenous and people of color believe their needs are ignored by the city. How would you involve marginalized communities as you fulfill your duties? Nikkita?
As a Black, queer, non-binary community member, I can tell you that our needs are very much ignored by the city. We have a city that has an extreme racial wealth gap, both due to exclusionary zoning, redlining, the keeping of Black, brown, and Native people from ever owning homes or land, and the legacy of that, the legacy of weed and seed, not to mention the continued use of policing for the purpose of punishment and control, rather than responding with a public safety system that both addresses the economic needs of our communities as well as the public health needs. The place that I would first start is looking at the city's race and social justice initiative, which is in every department, but it is not effectively standardized across departments to require that every department use the toolkit in a way that actually looks at those policies and puts them through the appropriate analysis. And so that means fully funding staff in each of those departments, not having them do that job and then another, but actually focusing specifically on RSJI, funding initiatives that are directed by Black, brown, and Native communities, and doing the best that we can to pursue overturning I-200 so we can affirmatively put dollars directly into Black, Native, and brown communities.
Thank you. Sara?
We need to create more opportunities to build generational wealth. That's it. And so that means helping people stay in their homes. It means direct cash assistance to renters so they're not, so that they can stay in their neighborhoods. It means technical support and access to low interest loans or forgivable loans. There are models in other cities. Denver has a good program where renters or small business owners in Black and brown communities can apply the rent used to a future purchase, and they can have it applied to their credit score as well. And that's something that we should be looking at. But we have got to also focus, let's not forget, on jobs. And as a small business owner, I'm extremely concerned about the small businesses in this town who are struggling to survive. That is where 70% of the people in the private sector work. And we can be doing more to retain those jobs and create new jobs through infrastructure investments and other workforce development programs.
Thank you. Well, now it's time for your closing statements, and we'll reverse the order from the opening statements. You each have 2 minutes. We'll start with Nikkita.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to share space with you all this evening. Thank you for your questions and really digging deep into the policies. I am running for Seattle City Council because as a frontline service provider who runs an organization that also laid no one off during the pandemic and actually hired more people and gave all of our staff raises, acknowledging the financial and physical stress many of them were under, believe that the city can do much better, both by our frontline service providers, by our workers, by the people who are responding to these crises, and that the city needs to be leveraging policies that get to the root causes of these crises so we don't find ourselves in this situation ever again. As our regional homelessness authority has instructed, the root of the housing and homelessness crisis is economic. And while there are other mental health and addiction things that are happening amongst many living outside, investing in workforce pipelines, economic opportunity, and building housing are going to be the most significant ways to address this crisis. We have an impending climate catastrophe in front of us that demands we invest in high capacity, rapid, connected, free public transit, and that we stop urban sprawl to protect our urban tree canopy, which is our natural defense against the climate catastrophe, and that we do the work of ending exclusionary zoning and building density throughout the entirety of the city. And we have to continue to divest from failed systems of public safety and invest in ones that work, ones that actually deliver on their promise and get people what they need when they're in crisis, but also build plans to make sure people do not continue to end up in crisis. And we need progressive revenue generation, not just so we can respond to these crises, but so that we can make our budget, our city budget, less brittle to recession and able to be more resilient when those crises do come to our economic system. None of this will happen overnight, but I am endorsed by the Sierra Club, Washington Conservation Voters, Sunrise Seattle, the Working Families Party, as I already said, Councilmember Girmay Zahalai, multiple city council members, and Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, because I am able to bring together a large coalition, including the MLK Labor Council, because I am the labor candidate who cares about workforce development, to be able to generate a city, build a city where everyone really has the opportunity to thrive.
Thank you. Sarah?
All right, well, so the city's at a turning point and the stakes are high this election. And so what I sometimes say is if you think things are going well in the city, I'm not your candidate because I am running a change campaign. We've got a majority activist city council whose extremist policies just aren't working, especially for our most vulnerable. And I believe that my opponent would represent the same. We have got to get back to focusing on basic services. These are the things that make the difference in people's lives. And I'm talking police, fire, libraries, parks, and transportation. We have to get back to listening to people, putting the needs of our constituents first. That's what's missing on city council. And, but I believe that I am the right person for the job because, as I said in the beginning, because of my experience working in government and in my experience running a business and taking care of our employees. And so, when it comes down to making choices this election, don't take my word for it. I have got a broad variety and diversity of endorsements, including the Seattle Times, the firefighters, the Seattle Building and Construction Trades Council, the plumbers, the iron workers, electricians, the machinists. Why do they support the business candidate? Because we're aligned on wanting a strong economy and good jobs. I'm endorsed by Allied Arts, Culture Pack, because the arts are incredibly important to our city, and by individuals, former governors Dan Evans, Gary Locke, Senator Reuben Carlisle, Gail Tarleton, and many others. So you can go to my website and see this. But my point is that people need to feel trust in government again, and they need to feel that their needs are being taken care of. And I believe that there is hope for change this election cycle, and I hope you'll consider voting for me. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much to both of you, Sara Nelson and Nikkita Oliver. We appreciate your sharing your thoughts and your plans with us. This will help us be more thoughtful and informed voters. Thank you, and have a good evening.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
We'll now move to the second portion of our forum with the candidates for Seattle City Attorney. I'll turn the program over to Laura Weiss, my co-chair for Election Forums Committee. Laura?
Thank you, Neil. Our next candidates are running for the position of Seattle City Attorney. The Seattle City Attorney oversees a department of 200 employees that are divided into 3 divisions: administrative, civil, and criminal. The administrative division handles budgeting, human resources, and information technology. The civil division provides legal counsel and representation to the city's elected and appointed officials in 7 specialized areas of practice, including contracts and utilities, employment, environmental protection, land use, and regulatory enforcement. The criminal division includes a number of important legal functions: case preparation, trial team, prosecutor support team, review and filing. Also, under the criminal division are 2 units that I wanted to particularly emphasize. One is the domestic violence unit, which prosecutes domestic violence and child abuse, assigning a victim advocate. Another is the specialty court unit that includes prosecutors that represent the city in mental health court, veterans treatment court, and administer a young adult pre-filing diversion program in partnership with Choose 180, a nonprofit organization. In addition to its traditional role of prosecuting people who commit misdemeanor crimes, This division, the criminal division, pursues a broad range of activities designed to reduce or prevent crime, solve problems, and empower neighborhoods. A vision statement for the criminal division reads, "The Seattle City Attorney's Office is committed to making Seattle a safe, healthy, empowered, and thriving community for everyone." Now back to Neil and the candidates.
Thank you, Laura. And we're pleased to welcome the two candidates for Seattle City Attorney. They are Ann Davison and Nicole Thomas Kennedy. Do we have them with us?
Yes, Ann's here.
Oh, there's Ann. Okay, I've got Ann and Nicole.
Yes, I'm over here.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Okay, super. Thank you. Well, each of you have 2 minutes for an opening statement, and you'll have the opportunity to respond to questions submitted by Horizon House residents. You'll have 1 minute to answer each question. And at the end, you'll have 2 minutes for a closing statement. We appreciate you honoring the signals of our timer. This will ensure we are fair to both of you and that we can cover as many topics as possible with our questions. An on-screen warning sign will alert you when you have 15 seconds remaining, and you'll get a final sign to finish, please. I will pose the question to each candidate, alternating as to which one answers first. So to begin with, you may each make a 2-minute opening statement responding to the following question. Please tell us why you're a candidate for city attorney, what your goals and emphasis in this position will be, and how you plan to accomplish these goals. We'll begin with Nikkita, or not Nikkita, with Nicole, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Just been through one event.
Yeah, yeah. I get it. Thank you, Horizon House, for having me. I appreciate this opportunity. I'm running for city attorney because I know that my plan will make us safer. I'm a middle-aged mom to a young kid who wants safety and stability, not just for my family, but for all our neighbors. I have worked in our criminal justice system. My opponent has not. I have seen that the current policies and practices are not working. I have seen clients suffering from dementia criminalized for forgetting to pay for groceries. I've seen poor people criminalized for stealing a sandwich, and each prosecution costs $10,000. There are certainly ways that we can be dealing with these situations better. The system does not provide safety and protection for everyone. We need to build community-based systems of care, protection, and safe harbor that do not put every community in danger, because we all deserve to be safe. I believe in prosecuting where the data shows it will make us safer. The data is clear that prosecuting poverty doesn't make us safer. Communities that are the safest are the ones that are the healthiest, not the ones that are over-policed. Our system of mass incarceration is about 40 years old. We have not always done things like this, and we don't need to continue to do things like this. Also, the people of Seattle need a city attorney who's aligned with and prepared to defend the policies passed by our elected council. We need the jumpstart tax and rental protections that are under attack from a wealthy few who want to move us backward. I am the candidate that is best qualified to defend those efforts.
Thank you. Now, Ann Davison.
Thank you. And I want to just give a caveat. I had technical difficulties tonight. So if we pause, hopefully it won't have that happen. I restarted things, so hopefully we won't have a problem. And I have 2 dogs, and they interrupted a lot this afternoon on an earlier call. So I just want to alert that.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for joining us. And I do want to acknowledge that it's Indigenous Peoples Day and acknowledge that we are here in Seattle on land that we are occupying, and thankful that we are able to be here. And thank you for spending some time and being civically engaged. And I'm running to be your city attorney. I've lived here for 25 years. I've been a lawyer for 17 years of those. And I think that we need professional, nonpartisan leadership to see civility, livability, and respect grow in our city of Seattle and for the people of Seattle. I'm an independent thinker and a Seattle mom to a son and a daughter. I'm not an activist ideologue, and I think this approach is vitally important as we look to implement our laws so that they are meaningful to everyone in every sector of our city to enhance public health and safety. It is time that we need to have a conversation to reconcile the fact that we've been failing to meet the needs of the most vulnerable here in our city, as well as the basic functions of public health and safety. I voted for Obama and Clinton and Biden, and I consider what occurred at our US Capitol on January 6th to be democracy threatening and contrary to my values. I think when we're talking about having an elected leader, particularly in Seattle, we need to have someone who is able to speak in a way that is inviting people to be part of the solution, not dehumanizing and demonizing anyone. It is important to talk about public safety in a way that we are welcoming to everyone within our city, because it is going to be a unified effort to make sure we are talking about victims of crime, in addition to understanding why someone's communicating in the form of a crime. And making sure we are looking at how can we advance things going forward. I look forward to speaking with you tonight and letting you know more about my platform. And I appreciate your time listening.
Well, thank you. Well, now for the questions submitted by Horizon House residents. A short version of each question will appear on your screen. You have 1 minute to respond. The city attorney heads a department of 200 employees. Responsibilities include advising on contracts, legislative drafting, regulatory enforcement, land use decisions, and representing the city in court. What experience do you have in these various areas that qualifies you for the job? Anne?
Yes, it takes me off my visual screen, but I have the question in front of me. Okay, there we go. And the clock, does it show up? I'm not sure where it shows up, but it just shows up at the 15-second mark.
15 seconds, right.
Okay. I've spent my practice 17 years in an advisory role predominantly, and that is a lot in dealing with contracts. And it is in a way that is bringing stakeholders together in meaningful ways to make sure we're preventative, not ending up in litigation. But that doesn't mean that I'm not familiar with it and don't understand how things work. I'm also an arbitrator on panels, and I've chaired panels of those, making decisions that are similar to being a judge and reviewing discovery and motions practice. So it is significant to understand when we're talking about the role of city attorney, it is someone to be a leader, someone to set the tone and direction of the department. And it is one that is to make sure that we are giving consistent advice, no matter who is asking the question, that we're giving consistent answers across the department to those who are elected to create policy and make decisions on behalf of our city and various departments across the city in those regards for our officials. That has been what I've been doing and look forward to doing that if elected as city attorney.
Thank you. Nicole?
Thank you. So I have extensive experience in court. I've been the attorney of record on over 600 cases. 400 of those are criminal, 200 of those were civil, a lot of them including housing and land use issues. And in every single piece of litigation that I've engaged in, there's an advisory piece. So my job as an attorney, as representing clients, is not just to appear in court and file motions and do trials, but I love doing those too. It is also to be an advisor and a counselor to my clients about how we want to move forward on different things. And so that's something that I have a lot of experience with, and I think it's really important. You know, my Republican opponent has only appeared on 6 court cases in her entire career. And compare that with 600, I think there's a pretty big difference there. So I'm the one that has the experience. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Should the Seattle end criminal prosecution for misdemeanors, including shoplifting, property destruction, prostitution, domestic violence, and misdemeanor assault? Explain your answer. Nicole?
I would not say, well, with the exception of prostitution, I would not say categorically that we should end the prosecution of any of those things. What I propose is to use prosecutorial discretion, which every prosecutor has, to make decisions that are based in justice, because that's the prosecutor's duty, is to seek justice, and also to do things that are going to actually increase public safety. So when we are having issues where it's someone stealing a sandwich or an unpaid bag of groceries, is there a value? Are we going to be more safe because that prosecution took place? Is that going to curtail the behavior? Is that what is fair and just? That's the analysis that needs to happen every time. What we're doing in Seattle Municipal Court right now is largely prosecuting poverty. Over 90% of the clients that appear there are impoverished enough to qualify for a public defender. There are ways that we can be dealing with these issues in a much better way. Each prosecution costs on average $10,000. And so when we're talking about survivor safety, repair for people and small businesses, there's a lot of ways that we can be using that money better. Sorry, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Anne?
I think it's important to note that my opponent has always said she would abolish prosecution of most misdemeanors. And every time I hear her speak, the price of prosecution has increased over these days, and that figure is wrong. And when we're talking about prosecution of misdemeanor crimes, it is not to be categorized or mischaracterized prosecutors. No one is looking to criminalize someone that is in a status situation of needing help. We are looking at what is the way to keep our city safe in a way that is just and also merciful. We are not a place that wants to put people in jail simply for that fact. What we are talking about is public safety. And when my opponent talks about dismantling the criminal division and abolishing the police and not having misdemeanor crimes prosecuted, particularly when we're talking about Domestic Violence Awareness Month this month, is substantial. And we need to make sure that we are protecting our victims and we are protecting our public. And we do that in a way that is balanced and compassionate, but it means that we do use the law because they have to mean something. They are the rules by which we engage with one another within our city to have a civilized, respectful city. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, how do victims receive justice if misdemeanors are not prosecuted? Anne?
Well, I think that my previous answer addresses some of that in that question, but there are ways that we want to make sure we are understanding why someone's communicating in the form of a crime. That is absolutely a social obligation that we all have. And I think personally, we all have that obligation as well. I've spent a lot of time in my personal life in regards to the reentry when someone has come back from time in custody. We need to make space for that. We need to understand why that has been occurring. And that's a social obligation that we have. Those answers need to be addressed in sectors of our society. The role of city attorney is to make sure that the victims are there protected, that we're not allowing there to be future victims when we are needing to intervene. And when we intervene, we are doing so in a way that's compassionate and meaningful. So we are changing the trajectory of someone's life. We are not looking to do more harm, but we are looking to be that place for someone when they are needing to have assistance so that we can have a functioning city, again, in every sector of society across our city.
Thank you. Nicole?
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
How do victims receive justice if misdemeanors are not prosecuted?
Okay, so I've never said that I would not prosecute all misdemeanors. And especially when we're talking about interpersonal violence, I have said repeatedly, time and time again, that prosecution has to remain an option. So what I've seen working in the system is that survivors currently don't have any recourse. So what happens, especially in an interpersonal violence situation, is once the police are called, once the courts are involved, the survivor is the one that's completely disempowered. And survivors have been telling us for years what they need to stay safe. They need access to treatment, to heal from mental health issues. They need housing, they need transportation. And instead we're spending our money prosecuting someone to put them in jail for a temporary amount of time. Misdemeanors, the maximum sentence is less than a year in jail. We need to be focused on what makes survivors whole. That's why I will also have a victims compensation fund for people who have been hurt by economic crimes as well. But there's lots of systems of justice that don't necessarily include traditional prosecution, although I'll say it again, it's an option.
Thank you. Well, what will deter an increase in crime if there are no legal consequences? Nicole?
So again, I'm not saying that there won't be any legal consequences. I'm saying what we're doing right now, where we're prosecuting poverty, because that is the reality of what is happening, despite what anybody wants to say. I worked in the court, so I know that is not actually making us safer. So prosecuting someone for stealing food or for sleeping under an awning is not deterring those behaviors because it doesn't make someone less hungry. It doesn't make them more housed. If we want to deter a lot of crimes, we need to be meeting people's basic human survival needs, the same needs that we all have. And we need to be addressing the underlying issues that are causing them to react in the way that they are. And so we can all see on the street today that we have lots of untreated mental health issues and mental illness on the streets, and we have untreated addiction issues on the streets. But I don't think a lot of people know that community mental health and addiction services are sorely underfunded in this community. It is incredibly hard to get treatment for either one of those things until you get to the crisis point. And that's what we need to be addressing. So consequences sometimes when it's appropriate, when it's the thing that's going to actually deter behavior, but also realizing what is causing this problem and addressing that.
Well, homicides have increased. The police budget, the size of the police force have decreased. and there are fewer officers on the street. What actions, if any, would you recommend to the city council to increase public safety and reduce gun violence? Ann?
Do you not want me to answer that last question? I just was curious.
I'm sorry?
Did you not want me to answer that last question?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
That's okay. Maybe there's sometimes different questions. For
No, thank you. I'm pretty glad you caught me on it.
either way, I just wanted to, I didn't know. You might
Sure.
have to put it on the screen though.
The question. Yeah, so what will deter an increase in crime if there are no legal consequences?
I think that we do need to be talking about that because, right, that is the place where we can intervene. We cannot have the limit be for someone deaf. We are a compassionate city. We are a city that has a deep, deep sense of care. And when you walk by, when the social modeling is being done for young minds, that we are not caring for people, to simplistically say that we are criminalizing poverty, that is not what we're doing. That is what no one wants to do. It's not what I want to do. What we're talking about is making sure that we do not leave people to be even further victimized. And that is an important part to understand, that when we are providing those societal limits, we are oftentimes protecting, we are intervening, and we are providing supervision so that we can help someone in a way that is built there for us to do that and not leave someone alone, ignored.
Well, thank you. Sorry about that.
No worries. Let's go to the next one you said.
My next question is, homicides have increased in the police budget and the size of the police force have decreased and there are fewer police officers on the streets. What actions, if any, would you recommend to the city council to increase public safety and reduce gun violence? You get the first shot at that one.
There are a lot of gun offenses that are misdemeanors, and it is important to understand that when we can, again, intervene at that level, we are hopefully then preventing things in the future from escalating. And that's a significant piece. When we're talking about police, again, that's all budgetary items within the purview of the city council and the mayor. But what we can do is make sure that what we put forward in the public discourse is respectable commentary and respectful words towards other humans, regardless of occupation, making sure that deference is not shown simply because we don't name call someone. We hold people to standards. Accountability is across the board. Accountability has to be part of that, but the way that we communicate with others in our public space matters. And I think that will go a long way, and that doesn't cost us anything.
Thank you. Nicole?
So the question was about reducing gun violence, yes?
And increase public safety and reducing gun violence, yes.
Sure. So I would say that homicides are up across the nation, even in cities where there wasn't reductions in the police budget. It is a real problem right now. I think the things that we can do for public safety are listen to the communities that are actually affected by gun violence and what they've been asking for years, which is mentorship programs, after-school programs, violence interruption programs. Those are the things that are going to keep us safe. Because as I said in the beginning, the communities that are the safest are not the ones that are over-policed. They're the ones that are the healthiest, that are resourced, that have what they need in order to survive. And those are the things that are going to help us move forward. There's, I think I had another point, but I just totally forgot it. So I'll just end there. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you. What actions will you advise city officials to take for the police department to come into full compliance with a court-ordered consent decree?
Is that for me?
Yes, Nicole.
Okay, sorry. Also, I forgot to say at the end of the last one, we need to be moving things off officers' plates. We don't need armed officers for every problem. And so we need to be freeing them up to actually respond to the calls where they're needed. With the consent decree, there's so many things that are very well documented that need to be in that consent decree. And I think that in the last contract negotiations, the city attorney gave away a lot of things that shouldn't have been, that should be in the contract. There was, I think, about 33 things that the Community Police Commission wanted in the police contract that didn't end up being in there. And that those are things that Judge Robart called out for not being in compliance with the consent decree either. So the next person who negotiates the next police contract needs to show that they can hold that they can hold police accountable and they're willing to put those accountability measures back in the contract, we don't need more deference to police. We saw what happened last year in 2020. Police were held in contempt 4 times. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. Anne?
We've heard the judge say that if we were to defund the police, we would not be in compliance. So it's important to understand that when we're looking at that, to make sure we are following the orders there and what has been recommended for us. I think, again, when you're looking at departments, that is creating our public safety system. We are, again, the way that we conduct ourselves is going to be instrumental in that as well.
Well, thank you. Do you support the concept of utilizing community courts for non-violent offenses? Explain your answer. Anne?
I think there is a place to have access to non-criminal interventions. I think it's important, as I've talked about for the entire part of this campaign, we need to have in the social space a conversation of healing. And that is also in regards to policing. So we are having better policing, relational policing with a holistic approach. We need to be making sure we move into that multidisciplinary space. And I think that that's an important part of it. Having those types of courts are, in some regards, are going to be meaningful. And we can look to that to provide a space for that. I think that's an important part to have.
Okay, Nicole?
Yes, I support continuing community court for nonviolent offenses. I mean, I would like to be moving things out of the court eventually, but we don't have the infrastructure that we need right now. So my idea is not to just defund the police or abolish prosecutions. What I'm talking about is building up community-based support so we don't need police and prosecutions for everything. And I think definitely community court has a role in that. And it has proven to be somewhat successful. There needs to be potentially some changes made, but I do think it's useful. And I think it's a much better idea than traditional prosecution when we are talking about poverty, which I'm sorry, is what is being prosecuted in Seattle Municipal Court a large part of the time. So when we are talking about those things, we do need to be hooking people up with services. And I think that the newest community court model, because there's been more than one over the years, has been successful with that. So I would continue that.
Thank you, Nicole. At times, city councils have attempted to intrude upon the mayor's executive authority. How would you deal with attempts by the council to encroach on the mayor's executive powers? Nicole?
So the council and the mayor actually have their own attorneys. So what the city attorney does is advise on legislation. So, and collaborate with the council and the mayor on proposed legislation. They actually have their own attorneys for those things, but you know, that it's not up to the city attorney to litigate sort of separation of powers between the council and the mayor.
Anne?
That is just wrong. They are allowed to have attorneys on staff, but the city attorney is the attorney for the entity. We are a municipal corporation. And so that is to be noted that is different there. Again, the advice that is supposed to come from the city attorney's department is one of legal in nature, not political or policy. And that is where we establish that trusted attorney-client relationship. So again, the legal advice that is provided, no matter who asks the question at what level, it's provided consistent answers, and that is set from the top down. So that's important to understand.
Well, thank you. How do you propose to reduce or minimize civil claims against the city that appear to be increasing in variety and number? Anne?
That's a great question. I appreciate whoever asked that. One part that I've always thought about is simply just our sidewalks. That is a place, a source of tort litigation that is frequent that we see. And there's a way that we can proactively be reviewing just sidewalk repair so that we're looking at that. And that is something that's ongoing throughout the city because it's just in the nature of just a busy city, we're going to have those issues and we can take a proactive stance. Again, like in my 17-year legal career, preventative in nature. What can we do that's proactive so that we are minimizing suits that are filed against the city? And that's one way we can do that.
Yes. So one way that we can reduce litigation against the city is to make sure that our policies and practices are actually being upheld. So it's up to the city attorney's office for a lot of these things to enforce the codes, to make sure that people are living up to these obligations, and to make sure different city entities, as well as entities that the city contracts with, are also holding the standard that they should be doing. So there needs to be careful consideration of that. There needs to be careful consideration around creating and crafting defensible legislation that that does not open the city up to unnecessary lawsuits, and then also making sure that we are producing new policies within city departments that reduce these things. So a lot of them are related to, sex discrimination or harassment. Those are things that really need to be dealt with on a policy level, and so we are not constantly seeing those things over and over again.
Thank you. City Attorney's Office includes a domestic violence unit, which prosecutes and negotiates domestic violence and child abuse matters with the assistance of victim advocates. Would you continue to handle domestic violence in this way? Explain your answer, Nicole.
No, I would not. And I'll tell you why. Because with traditional prosecution of domestic violence offenses, almost none of those cases go to trial, because by the time months later, when trial is set to begin, most survivors of violence don't want to testify against the person that they called the police on. And so, and honestly, a lot of the times they don't want prosecution at all. They wanted help with the situation. That's why they called police. It's usually a last resort. Survivors have been very, very clear about what they need to stay safe. Sometimes prosecution is needed in those cases, but not always. And it's been shown not to be a huge success. That's not what survivors want. They need resources to stay safe. So that includes housing, transportation, childcare, and we are spending so much money on prosecution that we aren't able to do that for victims. And that's where we need to be, that's where we need to have our focus, is violence prevention programs that, that abusers can access, because right now there really isn't anything, and family violence prevention programs.
Thank you.
And I'll end there.
Okay. Anne?
I think this is a very, very important aspect of what the city attorney can provide. There are things that are called lethality factors that indicate whether that abusive situation will escalate. And again, when we're talking about societal limits that our laws provide, we have to be the place to intervene so that the intervention, the last limit, is not death for a victim. And so when we look at that right now, our unit is process the cases in a high impact analysis to look at where is it that we need to be using those resources in a way that is meaningful. I've helped someone create an exit plan. I'm familiar with what these situations can be like. And when we are talking about intervening for someone, it's often women. It often adds to a woman being homeless because of that situation. When we're talking about these things, we cannot allow, like I said, the limit to become death. It is the place to intervene and make sure we are protecting people who are vulnerable in these situations. And it's important, critical work. One prosecutor told me she calls herself a murder prevention attorney because it is that serious.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Next question. Some individuals in marginalized communities, Black, Indigenous, people of color, believe their needs are ignored by the city. How will you involve marginalized communities as you fulfill your duties? Anne?
I think that is really important. And that is a space that I take a personal obligation to make sure that I'm listening to. I worked on a refugee camp on the border of Cambodia where people were fleeing civil war. I regularly go out to encampments. I was at a mosque on Saturday speaking with a secular leader. I think it's really important to understand that when people are literally pushed to the margins and feel that they're ignored and overlooked, the way that we lead is that you are opening up those avenues of dialogue in a way that is approachable and welcoming. And I do that personally in my life, and I want to make sure that that is the way I would run the city attorney's office, so that access is available, safety is for everyone, protection is for everyone, and we're making sure that that is inclusive in the message and how things are operating, so that that is no longer the way it is in Seattle for them.
Yeah, Nicole?
So first, I think what is abundantly clear and has become abundantly clear over the years by the evidence is that Policing and prisons and courts and jails are a racist system. Right now in Seattle, SPD's own data shows that they arrest Black individuals 5 times more and Indigenous individuals 9 times more, or stop them 9 times more than white people. And that is reflected in the court system as well. Despite having a progressive prosecutor at the helm, despite decades of reform, that is who is being prosecuted. That is who is being taken out of their communities. And there's no way to continue forward with this system exactly the way it is and say that you stand for racial justice. So we need to be looking at that and taking that apart a little bit by a little bit so we can actually get to real justice for other people. There's also the economic justice section of the office. And also something I would like to tackle is civil asset forfeiture, which really at this point in time only affects Asian families. So there's a lot of places for improvement in the city attorney's office.
Thank you. Well, sorry, but that brings us into the end of the questions. Yeah, it's time for the 2-minute closing statements. Start off with Anne.
Again, I want to thank everyone for listening and taking time to be civically engaged. It's a really important time to do that in our city and for the future of Seattle. Again, my young kids are observing social rules, as are their peers. So what we leave behind for them socially to inherit is important. We are looking at a crisis in our city, one that has been here for years, but the way we move forward is making sure we have approaches that are within our ability to make a difference and to have a positive impact in regards to public safety. We have victims of crime that are sheltered and unsheltered. We have people who commit crime that are sheltered and unsheltered. And our laws are there to be meaningful in a way that is impactful for us, so we can function, we can recover from the pandemic and move forward as a city in a way that has progress and productivity. If elected, I'll make sure that our approach to the law is fair and professional and respectful of everyone. With criminal law enforcement, we will focus on high impact crimes, centering victims in the process and build upon alternative interventions with accountability. And I will surround myself with seasoned experts wanting to serve the public. I'm humbled to be endorsed by former Democratic governors Christine Gregoire and Gary Locke, as well as 30 retired judges, which is unprecedented for them to come out, including 2 former state Supreme Court justices. It is clear that the rule of law is important. The way we conduct ourselves in and out of the job is important. What we put out in public discourse is important. We need a leader who wants to bring stakeholders together for public safety for the future of Seattle. It's important to understand that I'm also endorsed by people in recovery, medical experts who head up our addictions department, labor unions, a vast majority of people across neighborhoods, because it is important to see that we can have nonpartisan, impartial leadership that is the way to bring forward safety in Seattle to every sector. I'm also endorsed by police reform leaders because we can have reform and safety. They are not mutually exclusive. It is the blend that will get us forward. And I look forward to hearing from you more at neighborsforann.com or any social media platform that you prefer. And please reach out with any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicole?
Thank you, and thanks for having me tonight. So we all deserve to be safe in our homes and on our streets in the city that we love. In pursuit of that goal, we have poured our money into cops, courts, and jails, getting ever worse return on our investment. There is no way we can pretend this is working anymore. We need to be scaling up healthy communities while scaling back on ineffective punishment, not just because it's cool, but also because it's expensive and ineffective. Seattle voters want humane, data-driven solutions that enable each of us to live our lives without fear, regardless of race or zip code. We all deserve to be safe and secure. We need to focus on safety, prevention, and repair, and go where the evidence leads us as to how we're going to get those places. So I alone have worked in the criminal justice system and understand what needs to change. I am a true professional. While my Republican opponent has handled only 6 cases in her entire career, the most recent more than a decade ago, I have been the attorney of record on over 600 cases, 200 civil, 400 criminal. I have done a dozen trials and I've never lost a single one. Seattle needs a city attorney that will defend Seattle against the greed of large corporations who oppose progressive taxation, happy to let homeowners and low-income residents carry an outsized tax burden. We need a lawyer who's not afraid to take on mega landlords who want to overturn our tenant protections to line their own pockets, or fossil fuel companies that have knowingly destroyed our environment to make extra money. Seattle needs a strong leader and defender who will stand up to power in service of the people, and that is who I am. There's a reason that my campaign has been endorsed by Seattle Indivisible, Planned Parenthood, the majority of labor unions, and every single Democratic legislative district and organization in Seattle, as well as current elected leaders at every level of government, including council members Teresa Mosqueda, Tammy Morales, Guilherme Zahalai, as well as Rebecca Saldana and Kristen Harris-Talley. I hope to earn your vote next month. If you have any questions about my platform, because I have a lot of plans and they're very detailed, please go to ntkforjustice.com.
Thank you very much to both of you, Ann Davison and Nicole and Thomas Kennedy, for helping to make us more informed voters. So I'll turn the program back to Laura Weiss. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Which one is this?
Neil, thanks
Horizon House
What's
for
that?
moderating this
Memory
evening.
Care facility.
And I also thank to the candidates, and I have to admire you for standing up and running for elected office in this very difficult time. So thank you very, very
I didn't
much
watch this
for
forum.
what you're doing. I want to also thank some of those people that made this forum possible. Doris Ray and her subcommittee developed the questions for candidates, and many hours spent pursuing the best questions they could find. And thanks to Risa Ransom for the technical leadership, Jenny Stimpsons for the captions, and Adele Winnels, our tireless timer. They all made this possible. But finally, I want to thank the audience, because you, the voters, are now in charge. The ballots are going to be mailed out by the end of this week, yes, and the election is in your hands. Thank you very much, and good night.